Over the summer, Notion released their brand new charts feature, and so many of you messaged me right away wanting to know my thoughts and how I was going to be using the new charts feature. Honestly, it took me a while to fully form my thoughts on how I felt about Notion charts. I am absolutely a fan of the update, but there is some nuance to the charts feature. Don't worry, I'll be sharing the tips that I learned so that by the end of this video, you'll be making amazing Notion charts too. In case you missed the update, Notion charts are essentially a new database view for your Notion databases. You can display your data in a donut chart, a line chart, or as horizontal or vertical bar charts. And I'll be demonstrating how you can set up each of these chart types in just a minute. The Notion Charts update was absolutely a needed feature, and I am so glad they added it. Previously, the only way that you could add charts into Notion was either through widgets or third-party apps, most of which either didn't let you do much for free or you had to completely pay for that add-on. However, in my opinion, Notion charts do have limitations. I went into charts with the idea that they might work similarly to Excel or Google Sheets, which was 100% my mistake. How many times have I told you guys that Notion databases are not like Excel tables, and here I was gaslighting myself anyway. But to be fair, I think this is the main experience any of us who have worked with data have had in the past, so working with charts within the confines of Notion database properties is a bit of a learning curve. What honestly throws me off the most is that your data series can't exist within a horizontal row in a Notion database. It has to be vertical, or you might know it as a database property. As an example, if you guys saw my last video on how I organize my business in Notion, you may have seen my income tracking chart. I enter in my income data right down here. I have both my goals and then my income actuals in this tab here. But what's interesting is that when I went to make this chart, I could not choose this row for specific pieces of information. I had to have it as one database property. As you can see here in the chart settings, there is only one option here for what you can show on the y-axis, which means it needs to be a singular property. I specifically made this chart in this format because it was easy to see which month I was working in and where I needed to add that income into. Now, obviously I have a little workaround for this, so I'm going to show you guys what that looks like in just a bit. Now, the way you set up these charts absolutely makes sense with the way that Notion works, but it can make it more tricky or visually not so pleasing to enter in your data. Additionally, another limitation that I see is that you cannot define multiple series on your charts. Multiple series are often used for line charts that have more than one line, or for bar charts that are going to have multiple different bars within a specific data type. Again, if we look at our chart properties, you're only ever going to see one option here for your y-axis, which means you can't add multiple different series to your y-axis. As an example, if I wanted to add another line to this chart that maybe shows my digital products, for example, that's not going to work with the way that I have this set up because we can only have that one data point on the y-axis. But what we do have in Notion is a group by option. This is Notion's way to create multiple series based on other properties you have in your database. For example, in my travel pages, I break down what we spend each trip, and I can break that down by both what we spent our money on, showing it down here as accommodations, activities, dining, and transportation, and then also where we spent that money by showing what location I tagged in each of the transactions. In your chart settings, you can find that right here under the y-axis where it allows you to group by, and I have chosen destinations. Now, you may have noticed that option was not available on my other chart. This option only appears based on what you have chosen to show on your x-axis. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't believe these limitations are reason not to use Notion charts, but it is something to be aware of as you start to create those charts in your own workspace. Now, before I share all of the ways that I'm using Notion charts with you, I want to show you how you can create charts too. Recently, I've been playing with creating charts in my reading list, so we're gonna start there. Inside my reading list, I have a brand new section here that I'm using to show my book stats. I've been trying to get more into reading, and so now I'm starting to be a little bit more curious about what it is I'm reading and what it is I'm enjoying so that I can read more. So here I have my 2024 book stats right here, and I'm gonna show you how I have this chart set up so you can see more of the settings behind the donut type chart. So over here in our settings, I have my type set to the donut type chart. And then what I'm showing is the book genres here so that I can see what types of books I'm reading the most of. You can choose any of the properties that you have in your database here, but again, I am showing genre for this specific chart. Then below that, you have the option to decide what each slice represents here. So I have it counting how many books that I'm reading in each of these genres so I can see what I'm reading the most of. But again, you can choose any of the properties that you have here inside of your database to use to represent your slice. Then you can optionally sort your chart. I just have it from count as being high to low, but there are a few different options. And if you want to sort it based on the way your tags are sorted in your database, you can do that too, which is nice. Under the style options, you can choose whether you want to have it colorful or if you want to have it within a specific color scale. Personally, I usually go with the colorful option. It is a little bit less aesthetic in my opinion, but when you go with one of the single colors, for example, if I switch this all to purple, you notice that it starts repeating colors a lot more quickly because there's not as many colors for it to pull from. And so then you end up like here where my finance books are right up against my fantasy books and they're the same exact color. So depending on what it is you're showing, I usually just choose the colorful option because you're not going to get the two colors next to each other in the donut chart. If you choose auto, it is going to automatically choose the colors for you. Either one works to me, whether you want colorful or auto, usually just leave it on auto unless I want a specific color. Under the more style options, we have a couple things that we can adjust. We can change the height of our chart. So if we want it to be smaller, we can choose small. However, I think it's harder to read that way, so I usually keep them larger. You can also show your value in the center. So this is always going to be the total of whatever it is you're showing on the outside of your donut chart. You also have the option to turn off your legend so you don't see what the type is at the bottom. I like to keep that because you can always reference it. And then lastly, we have our data labels here, which I usually like to include both the name and the value of this. But you can also choose just the name or just the value if you prefer that. Now you can filter your charts just like you do with any other database. And so for this specific chart that I have my 2024 book stats. So what I did is I filtered this chart to only show my books that I have finished in 2024. So I have my finished is not empty and finished date is between the first of the year and the end of the year. Now, I also want to note that my genre option is not a select property, is a multi-select property. So as you can see here, it says I have read 5 fantasy books and 5 fiction books, but clearly I've only read 9 books this year so far. So what's up with that? It's because I have tagged these both as fantasy and fiction. And so they're not double counting it when it shows the total, which I think is nice because that would be a little bit misleading, but it is showing me what I'm reading in terms of the genre. So now let's go ahead and create a bar chart. I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this tab for us here so we have somewhere to get started with and play around a little bit. I'm just gonna mark this as my playing around tab. I will probably go back and change this or delete this later, but now we can kind of mess around and add some new charts. So I'm gonna choose a vertical bar. The only difference between the horizontal bar and the vertical bar is your X and Y axis because you can switch those if you want to. I usually prefer the vertical bar, so I'm gonna go with that today, but you have the option for the horizontal. So just like our donut chart, this bar chart is showing by genre here on the X axis, and then it's counting how many I have of that genre on the Y axis. I can totally change this up if I want to. If I want to show the rating instead, I can do that. And now I can see that I have 1 3-star book, 6 4-star books, and 2 5 stars. When we look at our settings, we see that this omit 0 values is currently checked. So if I turn that off, it's going to show me my no rating books along with my 1-star and 2-star books. I did not have any of those this year, so that is probably a good thing. But if we turn that back on, we are not going to see the 0 values. As another option, if I want to see all of the options, but I don't want this no rating option here, I can come to the sort by and just turn off the no rating. And now I can see my 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-star options. Now you'll notice in this chart, we have that group by option that I was talking about earlier. So if we choose to group by the genre here, we're now going to be able to see those different bars for all the different genres that we have inside each of those rating spaces. So if I select genre, we're going to see right here that I can now point out which genres I rated highly and which I did not. Now I want to note, because we are seeing all of the different genres that did not have a rating this year specifically, all these little 0 values here. If I choose to turn on omit 0 values, remember that it's only going to be working on what's on the x-axis, not by what we're grouping by. So again, if I turn this on, it's just going to take away those 1 and 2-star options because we didn't have any books in that category, but it's still going to be showing these 0 values here for the other ratings. If the zeros drive you nuts and you do not want to see them, something that you can do though is to come here into the more style options and then change the group style from not stacked to stacked. And then we can see a single bar that's going to color code based on what genre you had in that rating category. Now, inside our style options, we have a few different things that we didn't have on the donut chart. We have the options for our grid lines, which I usually like to have both in there. They're kind of faint and hard to see, but you can only turn on vertical if you want, or turn on only horizontal if that's something you prefer. Again, I like the both here. And then the axis name is what is showing down here. I see the rating and the count, and I usually like to have both of those on too. So now let's go ahead and take a look at a line chart. Line charts aren't going to make a ton of sense for this specific database, but we can still kind of play around and see how they work. Keeping the same settings that we had in our bar chart, we can see our line chart in the same exact way. It's going to make multiple lines for all of our different ratings and then show our genres down here at the bottom too. Now, something that might make a bit more sense in a line chart is to chart my books based on when I finished them this year. So what I can do is on the x-axis, I'll change this over here to my finished date property, and I'm going to go ahead and show it by month just to limit the amount of data points we have on our x-axis and make it a little bit easier to read. In this instance, I feel like the grouping is making this a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the grouping, and it's now just going to show how many books I read each month on this line chart. Again, this is kind of a weird example, but stick with me here. Now with line charts, we have another option here on the y-axis, and that is to choose cumulative data. So if I turn that on, instead of showing how many books I read each month, it's now going to show me my total of books as we go through the year. So I read 2 books in January, and then I read 1 in February, so now I'm up to 3. I read another in March, and I'm up to 4, another in April, I'm up to 5, another in May, and then we jump all the way to August where I have read 9 books so far. So this is kind of a fun option depending on what data you want to be showing in your line charts. Again, you can choose the color that you want to display, and then under the more style options, we have a few different options. We can choose to make a smooth line here, which then just kind of smooths things out a little bit and makes it a little bit less clunky. I really like this option. And then that gradient area here is coloring in underneath that line instead of keeping it white. So if I turn that off, we'll just see the line versus seeing that area underneath the line in the chart. So that is how you can create all of the different chart types within the Notion charts. Now, aside from the book stats chart that I created here, I have a few more examples that I want to share with you. First is my finance chart. I use this chart in conjunction with my finance planner, which if you are interested in learning more about that, you can check out this video here for more info. The way this chart works is that as I add in my transactions from the month and categorize them, then I can see where it is that I'm spending my money each month. It's something my husband and I both look forward to in our monthly finance meetings. Now, similarly to the chart that I have here in my personal finances section, I also like to have a view of this chart in each of my trips that we take because I do log transactions and expenses from those too. This works exactly the same way as my finance pie chart does. So now I can see how much I spent on transportation, activities, accommodation, and dining while we were out on our trip. And as I showed you before, I also like to have a bar chart of this too, so that I can see what I'm spending in each of the destinations as we're traveling. Again, it's broken down by the categories here at the bottom, but then I can also see each of the destinations themselves. And this is super helpful to me if we ever go back to these destinations because I don't know which ones were more expensive than the others. I use both of these charts in conjunction with my travel planner, which you can learn more about in this video here. Next up is my income tracking chart, and this is going to look familiar. You have already seen this one, but I love using this chart so I can see whether I'm on par with other months or below average and need to step it up a little bit the next month. And it really helps me keep an eye on what's going on in my business. Now, I also have a second chart with this, and that's my year-to-date income by income stream so that I can see what is bringing me in the most income each year. Both of these are incredibly helpful tools, and I like to include both of them in my monthly team meetings so that I can review them and make sure everything is looking good. I use both of these charts in conjunction with my biz planner, which you can learn more about in this video here. And then lastly is my macro planning chart. So inside my meal planner, I have the ability to track my macros and see what it is that I'm eating each day. And so I added a cute little chart to go with it so that I can see what my daily macros look like. So as you can see, today's macros chart right here is going to show me how much protein, fat, and carbs I'm eating to make sure that I'm eating those balanced diets. Now, this isn't perfect because it's not tracking everything I'm eating, but it's giving me a good idea as I'm doing my meal planning to make sure that I am on the right track with my macros. I also like to show this guy right here on the front page of my meal planner so I can easily see it. I just need to switch this little view here, and there's my chart. Now, I use this chart in conjunction with my meal planner, obviously, so if you want to learn more about that, you can check it out here. Just know this video was filmed prior to Notion charts, and so this feature is not available in that specific video. Lastly, I want to share a few tricks I learned to work around the Notion charts limitations and to set yourself up for success when creating your brand new chart. If you have a specific chart in your head that you want to create, be sure to design your database around that chart idea. When Notion charts were first released, I started diving into all of the different databases that I already had to see how I could use the Notion charts feature. Some of the ideas I had in my head did not really work with the way that I had my databases already set up. And honestly, I didn't feel the need to rearrange my entire database just to create a chart, and so I didn't. But if you have an idea, start by noting which type of chart you want to use. If your chart will have X and Y axes, make sure to create a property specifically for each axis. And if you want to add multiple lines or bars to your chart, use a select property to sort each of your data points. Now, if you have a database displayed in a certain way for easy data entry, but it's not necessarily created for easy chart creation, a little workaround is to create a second database that's related to your first database. As an example, with my income tracking chart, what I ended up doing to work around this issue of not being able to show my actuals for these specific horizontal rows is that I created a second database where I could put my months here on the x-axis and my total income on the y-axis. And the way this works is that each of these pages here in the month column is related back to each of the pages here on my income stream. Now, you may think that this is a little bit clunky because you then have to connect each of these different income streams to each of the months down here. But what I did is I added a button so that when I add a new income stream here, it's going to automatically do those connections for me, and I don't have to worry about manually doing that. Now, personally, I like to use charts sparingly. Charts are made to easily visualize your data. They can be incredibly helpful in so many areas, but they can also become ineffective if they're overused. If you're spending more time trying to figure out what your chart is even telling you and it's not making your life feel easier, then you probably don't need a chart in this scenario. Now, are you ready to go create some awesome Notion charts? If this video was helpful, give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions about charts, let me know down below in the comments. In the next video, I'll be going over Notion wikis and how I use them to create my SOP database. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. In the meantime, you can brush up on your Notion database knowledge in this video to help you when you go to create your chart databases. I'll see you in the next one.